Boresbåtin deike. Ja, det uske nummer 1 boresbåtin min kjeppes digarstallide. Warmly welcome to all of you, and of course, special welcome to our eminent panelists. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this session on shaping and making of culture policy in the Arctic. And as we heard yesterday, they touched upon a core question for our debate, namely, are the politics rooted in the north or governed by the south?
As you can see, all our panelists, they are drinking from a cup made by wood, a goksi. We ask them to bring them the cup with you on every meeting you go from here, and never use those bottles as a tribute to Mother Earth. Both of us, both Else-Grete and me, are employees at the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway. Else-Grete works as a professor in indigenous studies at the Center for Sami Studies, with political science as her disciplinary affiliation. From Skånland, Skanit municipality, a traditional Sami area around here. I'm a director at the University Museum and associated professor in cultural studies. We would like to present the panelists for you. It's an honor for us. Nina Björby is a politician of the Social Democracy Party and the chairman of the Regional Committee of Culture in Västerbotten and chairman of the organization Regional Music in Sweden. Nina is the Västerbotten representative in the Committee 3 of the Assembly of European Regions, and she's even chairman of its subcommittee Culture.
And Nita Jasko is a member of the Sami Parliament in Finland, and she's also serving as the president of the language board of the Sami Parliament. She's from Inara, and she studied Sami language, Inari Sami language, works as a translator, she joiks, and she is a dojar.
For those who doesn't know what a dojar is, she makes Sami handcraft. Mara Kimmel is a lawyer and a professor who works with Alaska Native tribes in governance issues and with immigrants and refugees in human rights issues. Mara has a long career in Alaskan public policy focused on issues of rights and justice, and is a faculty at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. So Anchorage is our main friendship tone in this conference.
And many of you have met Karoline Trollvik, the festival director of the indigenous festival Riddu. Annually, this festival gathers 3,000 people, participants from all over the world, and it takes place in Gaivotna, which is the home place of Karoline's. And she also has a master in social anthropology with an in-depth study of indigenous peoples and cultures.
Aili Keskitalo from Kautokeino municipality. She has been a member since 2005, elected representative of the Sami Parliament of Norway. And she's elected from Avjovari constituency as a representative of the Norwegian Sami Association, the NSR. It's my party too. She was the first female president. She is our matriarchy in Norway, and she has a Master of Public Administration from Copenhagen Business School.
Stephen Loft is a Mohawk of the Six Nations, a curator, scholar, writer, and media artist. He has the position of coordinator of the Aboriginal Arts Office with Canada Councils for the Arts, as we heard yesterday. And in 2010, he was named Trudeau National Visiting Fellow at Ryerson University in Toronto, where he has continued his research into Indigenous art and aesthetics.
Marianne Wallman-Magga is the most bravest of us all today, because Vibeke Larsen is ill. She has just jumped in her chair. Thank you for that. It's a risky sport you jump into. She has been elected as a representative of the SP since 2010 and represents the Labour Party. Member of the Council of the Sami Parliament, and she's from Kirkenes, where Pikene på Broen have their working place, and her family is into reindeer husbandry.
Yes, and Janike Larsen is an associate professor at the Department of Urbanism and Landscape at the University College of Architecture. She teaches landscape theory and history and is also the project leader of a research project called Future North. She coordinates a new landscape study at the University of Tromsø as well.
Our aim is to debate culture policy. We will try to keep time so that we can hear those wonderful voices loudly in this room. As announced, we are going to touch upon similarities and differences between the culture politics in the Arctic region and the role of culture and culture institutions when big issues are at stake. Culture is about values and norms, about knowledge from one generation to the next, telling about who you are, where you come from, and what you share with others, strengthening individual and collective self-esteem as a guidance for future choices.
So that's the broad meaning, and a more narrow meaning is related to the understanding of culture as a sector in society and a policy area. So this is also our initial approach, the shaping and making of culture policies. So, for instance, what kind of measures are enacted to pursue development of indigenous cultures and arts, self-determination, joint responsibility?
We have invited the 8 panelists to present a short statement that is 5 minutes on you or your institution's take on possibilities and challenges of culture politics in the Arctic region. Maybe you will touch upon the culture policies of your own institutions, your country in terms of support to indigenous cultures and arts. What is the place of indigenous culture policies on the political agenda? It seems like culture issues are a female field when it comes to this group. And so we are happy to have one man in the panel. When you have 1 minute left, we will give you a hint. Let's start with our guests from abroad, those who have traveled the longest to be here. Mara, you are the first one.
Great, the most tired goes first. So thank you very much for having us. We're very honored to be here today. So I'm not indigenous and I'm not an artist, but my creativity comes out in the way that I lawyer and the way that I teach. And I think actually that's a big part of how we deal with culture and knowledge in our community in Anchorage and also in Alaska. Oh, thank you. I think that culture and knowledge is the essence of fate control. And fate control is really a cornerstone to self-determination. It's the ability for us to figure out our own fates and our own futures. And I think that the idea of fate control is complicated by the fact that, as Professor Chartier talked about yesterday, there are more people thinking about the Arctic than there are people who live in the Arctic. And so there's a constant tension between who makes the rules and who has to abide by those rules. And there's very often the influence of faraway capitals, southern states who may not understand the norms of the North. And so the challenge for us is how we maintain our identity in the North in light of that fact, and in light of the fact that sometimes the voices of Northerners can be drowned out by policymakers from far away. I think this is especially true with indigenous cultures, particularly in Alaska, where a lot of the cultural rights are tied very deeply to land rights. And land rights and the right to self-governance has been a struggle for Alaska Natives and the indigenous communities in our state. What's been happening on a positive note is that I think indigenous knowledge and local knowledge has been increasingly recognized by policymakers as integral to a sustainable future and to creating better fate control for our communities and our state. And so I think if the creative sector can follow the knowledge sector in that way, things will bode well. But I think that there are a lot of challenges in Alaska given the restrictions that tribes face regarding rights to self-determination and rights to self-governance. My hope then is that as we figure out a path through, we do rely on our creative impulses and the ways that we interpret the laws and the policies to give rise and room to human rights, to try to figure out how we can exercise legal rights to self-determination and to sovereignty in ways that can then elevate and integrate traditional ways of knowing and indigenous cultures.
Thank you. Could you pass it on to Stephen?
Sago. I am indeed Mohawk. That's a First Nation from the land we now know as Canada. In my language, Ganyangahaga is our name for ourselves. And I first want to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Sami people, and to bring greetings and respect from the elders and leaders of the Ganyangahaga communities to the Sami nation. I want to talk about, I will also work at a federal bureaucracy. I work for the federal government, which is a very touchy position for Indigenous people in Canada, because the nation state of Canada has oppressed us, committed cultural genocide against us, and continues to try to assimilate us in various ways. But we are at a unique time in Canada's history. It's a very young nation. Certainly there were many nations that existed on that land prior to it becoming that. But it is going through a process of evaluating and revisioning its relationship with Indigenous peoples. Part of that has been a truth and reconciliation process. Some of you may be somewhat familiar with that process that has gone on in Canada over the last few years to try to dig at some of the roots of the hugely problematic relationship we've had over many years, and try to redress some of the issues that have separated us and kept us from truly sharing the land in a conciliatory fashion. So I think one of the issues for working for that federal government is how can we make change? So I work for a federal bureaucracy, and I have to recognize that it's a colonial structure. And within colonial structures, we have to take the position that we are all agents of either change or stasis. That we cannot, that the status quo is possible. That's what's been the norm for a long time. But we're at a time of change where we can start to think about truly having a nation-to-nation relationship with the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, of what we now call Canada. And so part of the work that I do with the Canada Council for the Arts, which has as its mandate to fund, support, encourage the arts and cultures of that land, but that must include Indigenous peoples in a fundamentally new and different way. And we've been going through a vast transformation at the Canada Council, and what I want to talk about and the part that I lead there is what we think is an innovative new program of funding that fundamentally places the relationship and the nation-to-nation relationship that truly respects, honors Indigenous worldviews, Indigenous ways of thinking, knowing, and making, and is rooted in self-determination and cultural sovereignty.
Half a minute left.
1 minute left. So I'd like to talk a lot about that program, but more to say that if we truly are embarking on a journey of conciliation, reconciliation, that we must start to think about that relationship in new ways, that decenters whiteness, centers indigeneity, and then move forward in a way that we can truly honor a shared journey together. And we can do that by creating policy. We can do that by creating new mechanisms of legislation and funding. But it must be led, it must be developed, and it must be administered by Indigenous people for Indigenous people. And I hope that the programs of the Canada Council for the Arts can be a model for others in that direction. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And
That is-
to Marianne. Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to be here, even though I had short notice. I think when we speak of the culture, it's partly difficult because it's ourselves. We're talking about our own language, our culture that's alive and who we are. And it's also integrated in everything we do and say and how we live our lives. It really defines us as a person and as a people. And it's also transmitted through our language, the material objects, rituals, arts, and institutions from one generation to the next. And many Sami are also bicultural and bilingual, and that show also it's an important part of us, and it makes us stronger because we can cope with the different side of our nation and our land. And this is also because I want to talk about this is how we can make jobs of it, how we can make the cultural businesses grow. It's difficult because we have to put ourselves on sale. And how do we define what's okay to sell and what kind of story, and is it a real and good picture of the Sami culture and way of living? But our culture is also important, the part of our democracy, and how our government doesn't always look at it that way. At the Sami Parliament, we use about 125 million Norwegian crowns on the cultural part. And we get transmitted 80 millions from the Department of Culture. So we have those free money who's not bound to anything that we use, because this is so important. And this is the institutions, and this is building the democracy. They are an important part of the democracy building, all our institutions. We have the need to tell the other, the Norwegian part of the population, and also the other Arctic inhabitants and people about what is our culture. We have to set the debate, but it's not easy because we're people living in 4 states, and we have not the same opportunities to have democracy. In Russia, it is so totally different. When we try to make other people understand and make the government understand what we need to make our culture good and alive and develop it, we try to make the government listen, but they say they listen, but they don't do anything about that. I mean, and this is important, is the lack of equality between the Norwegian and the Sami people in developing institutions. We have no Sami art museum. We have no adequate house for the Sami National Theatre.
1 minute left.
And this will continue. The gap will be bigger year from year because we don't get the same opportunities. And at last, the government party FrP has in their program that they want to put the Sami parliament to an end. So that's our everyday life. Thank you.
Thank you. And then it's Neta, who comes from Finland. Can you? And also is a member of the Summer Parliament of Finland.
Oh, this is on.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and I would like to acknowledge the protesters at Teno who are protesting against the restrictions of traditional Sami fishing rights. Here where we are seeing a very powerful cultural protest rooted in tradition and belonging, and reorienting our society back into the traditions of our people. I'm here as a replacement, so I'm trying to be very brief. What I do is culture. I work with the language, that is my livelihood, but I also do doji, I do handicrafts, I yoik, whatever. That is the culture, that is everyday, the basis for our cultural life. And the more of us, the healthier our society is and the healthier our own culture is, the freer we are to do these things as part of our everyday lives, the better and the healthier and more vibrant our cultural life also begins. When I say that what I do is culture, I don't mean to put myself as an artist. I'm not an artist. People who like Marihanne Saga and Sofia Janike are artists. And they are rooted in the tradition and the culture and the everyday life in which the Sami culture is a part of. And these spaces where this is possible, where we have the right, where we have the practical opportunity to actually live in our culture, is being contested, and it's being mined for both material and intellectual property that belongs to the Sami. And we are seeing now that the wave of Sami art that is very popular now is actually rooted in sort of like a protest, either protest or reclamation or reorientation. And in this instance, we are seeing that people who have grown up in Sami culture, who have been able to claim their culture and live it, are the ones who are actually leading the way here, who are showing us the way forward in protest and also in everyday life. And I'm also echoing a lot of the participants on this panel in the sense that our cultural life is very much tied up in the material parts of our lives. The extent to which we control our resources and our homelands is ultimately what decides the fate of our cultural life. Because I don't see as an Inari Sami person, as a near to the Swenjelsit, I have witnessed in my own family what happens when your land is taken from you and you can never get it back. And so it has been a very good week. That last week we had finally an opening for a Sami museum, for a Skolt Sami museum in Nautam, in Neiden in Norway. It was a very touching and moving event. And it was the creation of these Sami spaces, the literal creation of space that is dedicated to the Sami. And the more figurative, the political and the social creating of spaces is what we need to concentrate on in order to have a vibrant cultural life and to have a future for ourselves. Our president, Tiina Asanila-Aike, said in her commencement speech at the museum opening that we cannot keep on giving up control of our lives and our lands to others. because we have to take control. And this is what I think Mary means by fate control, that when we can take full responsibility of our lands and of our lives, and that is when we can be healthy as a society. And that is when I think we will have a more vibrant cultural life. As it is in Finland, the Sami culture is seriously underfunded. I don't remember how many millions you said, Marianne, what it was, but we get a fraction of that. We have less than 200,000 each year to share to Sami artists and cultural workers.
1 minute left.
And that is a serious issue that we are facing now, that Finland is starting up its leadership of the Arctic Council. And it will be interesting to see if the Sami and other indigenous interests are going to be represented there, or whether our culture is going to be turned, as our lands, into something, a resource to be extracted from us. Thank you.
And the next one, thank you so much, Nita. And the next one is Aili.
Kiitos, Puriholmot. There's a Sami saying that is really fitting for these days here in Harstak. Similar souls recognize each other. And when we are here celebrating Arctic cooperation, it came to mind. We were just at the film screening of The Last Walk, which I truly recommend to you all. The same story interpreted by different film creators from different parts of the Arctic. So we recognize each other, but at the same time, when you see the similarities, you also see the differences much better, and you realize something about yourself when you see someone who is like you but not quite like you, and that I find really inspiring. The indigenous experiences of the Arctic are somewhat the same. We have all experienced assimilation policies, sometimes loss of land, loss of culture, loss of language. But we don't only share the sad stories, we also share the happy stories, taking back the fate control. That is also a shared experience, and I think the Arctic Indigenous Cooperation, which has been going on for more than 40 years, it is also about sharing those happy experiences that move us forward. I expect that you all know that the Sami people is a people of these lands, where the state were established after we were here, and they drew borders through our territories. So we live now in 4 different national states, and that is somewhat demanding on many levels, also when it comes to cultural policies. But nevertheless, we try to do something together, and that is what I would like to focus on today, what we succeed in together. And I would like to share with you 2 examples. This is the music I'm listening to these days. It's a CD by Katarina Barrok. It's called Baros. And she's an Umesami joiker and musician. And she's from the Swedish side of the border. But this CD, it was funded by both the Sami Parliament of Sweden and the Sami Parliament of Norway. And it gives me as much pleasure than any CD from the Norwegian side of the border, because she's my girl. And the other example, this is the book I'm currently reading. It's Tropika Revsat, and it's written by Ingemari Aikio from Anar, I believe. Otsejoka. Andagasi. She's from the Finnish side of the border, and she's it's a novel for young people about a young Sami girl traveling the world, and it's published by DAT, which is a Sami company with bases both on the Norwegian side of the border and on the Sweden side of the border, and it's funded by the Norwegian Sami Parliament, and it's as important to me and to young Samis as a book written on the Norwegian side of the border. So even if the state borders creates lots of problems, lots of challenges, lots of bureaucratic challenges, we do succeed somewhat in pooling our resources together, both our human resources, our artistic resources, and to some extent also our economic resources. And I'm really happy to see that working, and I truly wish we would be able to do it even more than we do it today. The Sami parliaments of Sweden, Norway, and Finland, we have a formal language cooperation, and I hope in time we will also see a formal cooperation when it comes to cultural policies, because it's really about the same thing. Thank you. Gito.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then it's Nina from Sweden, which works both local and global. Local.
You could say.
Yeah.
I have some slides, please.
Oh, which ones?
You can start with a.
I'm also just wondering which button to press.
Yes,
yeah.
as said, and I live in Umeå, and I love her too. So, can she be a little bit mine too? I hope. Thank you. The next slide, please. This is the Arctics. I really like this picture, because if you think of it, there is no center and there is no periphery in this area. We are all, wherever we are, we can say to ourselves, I am in the middle. And that is a good thing, I think, because that's one of the images we struggle with, as you said, how people define us. Of course, we have a lot of diversity, we have a lot of contrast, even polarizations, yes, but also a very dynamic area in the Arctics. And I also believe that we have quite many things in common. We have the natural resources, for example, the oil, the gas, the forest, and the mining. And that's good, yes. But you could also say that it's a curse, of course, for the land, but also what's in our minds. As being a woman in the northern Sweden, I know this struggle where you have a society that think that these resources are the real base upon which the society lives upon. Well, you can have other things, but this is the real thing. You also, at least in Sweden, we can change image. Often there is a gap between the coast and the inland, between the Sami people and the Swedish people. And as said, the image. We struggle with a strong, white, macho, quiet, hunting man, drinking the beer of Northland, eating the cheese of Västerbotten, living in the wasteland. And this is the people from southern Sweden. And they are convinced that this is how it works. And on the other side, we have at the university the School of Architecture that has been ranked as the best in the world several times. We have the best broadband. We have the skier Anja Persson that had won a lot of Olympic medals. We have refused and Sofia Janok that not only have made their voices heard, but also have changed a whole generation. And we have the film Sami Blood that have won prizes all over the world. And I think also we have a profound engagement for several things, for equality, for the indigenous people, for veganism, whatever. And also a mentality of do it yourself, because otherwise nothing happens. And in this area of diversity and contrast, polarization and dynamic people, I think culture is one of the best tools to make those walls become bridges. It's not very hard. You have a bridge like this, a wall like this, and you just turn it down, then it makes a bridge. And that is how I see culture. And of course, everything starts with artists, the culture workers, of course, but I'm always also convinced that if you have culture, you create more open, questioning and democratic societies, as said before. And other domains have step by step, little by little, understood this, that investing in culture makes people move here. It's harder to you see more growth, and you see a society that's not going backwards but forward. So in this conference, I think, well, we all think we need culture, and we need culture politics also for the other domains, and we need a policy so we can compare, for example, the money. You have like 15 million euros in Norway. We have 1.5, a tenth. So we need those to make the comparisons. And also the process of making the policy. But then we must consider to do it right. What method do we use? Who do we bring? Who is in power? But if we do it right, I am convinced that this will be something really, really good for the future and make this world even a better place to live upon.
Thank you. Thank you. And then it's Karoline.
Yeah.
Ologito, thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about Riddu first to explain our kind of festival and organization. So for those of you who don't know about us, the name Riddu means little storm on the coast. And it has been arranged in Kampvold in Olomaivagi since 1991. It's now an international indigenous festival with a focus on Sami and indigenous people's art and culture, with a diverse program for children, youth, adults, with music, films, seminars, debates, and lots more, courses. And it's about variety, and it's about giving people a chance to access all different kinds, all different aspects of culture, but also through the artistic domain. The main objective of our festival was and still is to create greater awareness about Sami people, and especially the coastal Sami culture in the area where we are, and to turn shame into pride. In our area, Kampvold, the Sami culture was almost completely gone. Due to the Norwegian assimilation, there were many who did not want to define our area or even call our area Sami. And when Riddu started by the youth who wanted to change this, by the youth who were politically engaged but also wanted to create an arena to have these dialogues, they were met with great resistance within Kampvold, and it was not easy. But they continued, and they were rebellious, and they knew that what they were fighting for was something that was going to gain a lot of people, and also the next generation, people like me who were growing up in the community at the time. And also at the same time, the festival received much external recognition, and many Sami artists praised the work, and more people flocked to our festival. It became a happening, and it became an important Sami happening for people outside of Kampvold as well. On a local and national scale, Riddu has contributed to the awareness of the coastal Sami culture and history, and is continuing to do so. Indigenous peoples and minorities all over the world share in many ways the same history, and we've been talking about that a lot today and the previous day, and also been talking a lot about that between the sessions with amazing indigenous artists and leaders that are present here. So this space, this arena has been incredibly important for me as an indigenous leader in Norway, to meet other indigenous leaders from other places and talk about how we can do things and how we can move forward. So I want to thank the organizers for that. Yes, so through our own struggle, we believe we have inspired, and now I'm talking about us in Riddu. We believe we have inspired others to continue fighting for their cause. By inviting other indigenous peoples, artists and representatives and also guests to our festival, we have, and we believe that we confirm that their culture and their tradition is also valuable within the greater scheme. Today, like, we are 26 today, 26 years old.
1 minute left.
Oh, 1 minute left, okay. Because I also want to say something about the challenges that we are facing and how, what it's like running an indigenous organization and festival and professionalizing over years. So we've been part of the hub, the core festivals of Norway for several years, and that gave us opportunity to grow and to professionalize. So we built an administration of 4 people and with different positions within the administration, and continued to keep the core of the festival, which is the grassroots. So when Riddu was established professionally, the organization made sure that the owners of the incorporation were still the volunteer staff that contribute throughout the years. So they would still have a stake in how the festival would evolve. But this system of funding is not present anymore in Norwegian culture politics. And for us, it has been important to point out to the Ministry of Culture that we believe that there is a need for a cultural institution, an organization, and an arena that can function as a flagship and a lantern, with the main responsibility for conveying indigenous culture nationally and internationally, and for being an example for others. We want to, and we do function as so much more than a regular music festival that we're currently placed together with other music festivals, and that in that sense, with the greater purpose of what we're doing and what we're programming, it's we're a bit worried about this, but at the same time, we do experience that our collaborators in the Art Council has consideration and understanding for this point that we've made. So that means that my time is up, maybe?
But you will be back. Thank you so much, Karoline, and then Janike.
And when Janike gets the microphone and the PowerPoint, I'll tell you that when she has said her words, we are going to make a debate, and you are going to be invited in, and we will end at 15:30, 3:30.
Yep.
Okay, hello. Can you hear me well? Yeah?
The
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see. All right. Okay, so I will not be speaking from an indigenous perspective. I'm a researcher, and I've been leading this master's program in landscape architecture in Tromsø for 4 years. And both have, over the past years, given me some insight in the Arctic. The Future North project was a traveling research project, so we've been cross-disciplinary, and we have studied the relationship between landscape change and social development in the Arctic. On the Kola Peninsula, on the Barents Coast, specifically in Vardø, and in Svalbard, including Bear Island for some of us. So this will be about territorial management more than governance, I guess. And I'll be just talking briefly about some issues that we have observed and that we think that both designers and artists may address with very successfully. So we're looking at land and at those who live on it, on how this relationship manifests through the organization and development of cities and land use policies. We have looked at mineral extraction and its policies, or lack thereof, in the far north of Quebec in Canada. On the Barents Coast, where settlements and cities are trying to position themselves vis-à-vis the petroleum industry, hoping to be actors in a future petroleum landscape, or in connection to the Northern Sea route. We have been looking at both at national policies and on local efforts to improve local spaces, make them inhabitable, as is the case in the city of Vardø, or to make them profitable, which is the case often in Longyearbyen in Svalbard. And the landscape program that we started, which is a joint program between the Oslo School of Architecture and Design and UiT, the Arctic University of Tromsø, was established to meet the need for landscape architectural expertise in the Arctic and the subarctic. Among these challenges are what count as kind of normal challenges for landscape architects, such as city development plans, green infrastructure in the city, and also in conditions where plant growth is slow, surface water, when we have the more and more often have the freeze-thaw problematics of the subarctic, rain on top of snow, water everywhere, clogged pipes, and the melting permafrost in Svalbard. And how to build in conditions like that. These are among the kind of normal technical problems for a landscape architect. But then we have the more radical challenges, which is how to deal with territories in the north where external forces have a strong presence and agency. The Arctic now seems to be defined by large-scale industries. Infrastructures such as deep water harbors are being built quickly in many places, and often in disregard of the slow time of a community. Example of this, I forgot to show you my permafrost Svalbard picture. These are landscapes that are now getting lost as the permafrost is starting to thaw in Svalbard. And then to Vardø and the new industrial harbour, which the local municipality and county municipality spent close to 1 billion Norwegian kroner building, because they wanted to mobilize to be a supply harbour for the Stockmund gas field, which was put on hold 4 years ago and may never happen. So now, and a small percentage of the money spent to build this harbour could have saved the old fishing harbour in Vardø. Oh my God. All right, okay. So this is one challenge. Confused populations, confused municipalities, how to spend the money. And then there is the other issue of increased tourism I'll come back to these maybe, in Svalbard, which is a territory that is where government forces are trying to make a switch from coal extraction and export to tourism as a main way of making revenue off these islands. So my concern is, how are we supposed to meet these challenges if we are treating landscape the way we always have treated it, as something that we manage, something that we may control, something that always makes a profit. And traveling in Svalbard, something very strange may happen to you while on a boat, a tourist boat that we as researchers sometimes also use. So you can take the boat into the Billefjord near Longyearbyen, and you can look at Pyramiden, the Russian, this what do you call it, closed mining city, which extracted old coal for about 40 years. And then to the other side, on the other side of the boat, you have the receding Hammarskjöld glacier, which has melted from being out here only 20 years ago. So which means that a whole lot of it has melted. So you can look at the coal production site and you can look at the receding glacier and know that you have contributed, we as a species have been doing both at the same time. It's due to operations such as the one in Pyramiden that we can now enjoy the spectacular tourist site of a melting glacier. So this paradox is a paradox that we need to start confronting. And it means that we start treating territory not as something we manage, but as something we care for. And in that I want to include a care for this, which is something called geology, which is also our neighbor. What's the name? The new director of the National Museum talked about neighbor care earlier this morning. But theorists like Doreen Massey, who's talking about the relation of places to other places, and the global and the local, and all this, she would say that geology is also our neighbor, and it is something we need to care for. This deep time that is the condition for us being here. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's give them a big hand. And I'm sorry for being a bit strict on the time, but we want you to have time to discuss, and you can return to your points during the discussion. And one of these core themes and the red thread through this conference is collaboration and cooperation. And of course, that is, we are talking about many players, many actors, and we are wondering, given the many actors involved, that we are wondering about the roles and the resources allocated. So first, a question to Marianne and to Nita about your relationship, the Sami Parliament's relationship to the ministries responsible for culture. We heard this morning that there is always an open window of opportunities. Do you feel that? Do you experience that? I don't know who takes the lead here.
The microphone.
Oh yeah, the microphone, sorry. Oh.
Yes, thank you for the questions. I'm not sure I get everything noted. As I earlier said, the connection to the government and the ministries could have been better than it is today, because it's like we have discussed these days. They say they want to hear our stories, and we have the right to consult, and they also have the right to not listen or not do anything about what we're telling. And I personally don't like to be asked if they're not going to listen to what I have to say. And I think that is one of the major problems with our connection. And also other actors, I know it was said earlier today that the Sami Parliament don't have the force to do any changes, but I think we have developed these years and become quite important because industrial actors, they at least they want to come into dialogue with the Sami Parliament, and also the changes in the law that make us give us the right to put in a protest on certain things, and that has an effect for the culture, and it's also been said in the windmill development plans when they are rejected. It's said because of it will threaten the culture, and that is really important development in these questions.
Nita, or I'm not sure if I pronounce your dialect.
Oh yes, that's pronounced Neta.
Neta. Okay.
But to your question, I'm not sure if I can actually answer that because I don't work on the cultural sector so much. But in Finland, the Ministry of Culture is combined with the Ministry of Education at this point, and it's one of the most important ministries to the Sami Parliament and a lot of the Sami institutions that we have in Finland. They fund most of the functions of the Finnish Sami Museum in Inari, and it's like other locations, and they fund most of our education material production, also cultural happenings such as Kappmakovat and Erencies. So they are putting a lot of money, well, not a lot of money when you compare it in the bigger scheme of things, and it's never enough. They are the ones who are actually putting money into creating the content. So it would be very interesting to actually be there and see in these negotiations that what is actually the current relationship, because I deal with the Ministry of Justice, which is responsible for language and linguistic rights in Finland, and it's also the ministry that under whose discipline is the Sami Parliament is. So I don't personally deal with the Ministry of Culture, but we definitely need, and I think the Sami Parliament the board of the Sami Parliament has actually taken steps to creating working groups with different ministries and the Parliament of Finland, which I think is an excellent step forward. So we could actually have a more fluent way of communicating our needs and perhaps to help them understand and create an understanding that why are we asking for this, and why is this so important, and why do we want to fund a youth organization, which is a non-governmental organization, when we already have a youth council in the Sami Parliament. And these are the kinds of questions that can be surprising that those are not the same thing. And of course they are separate functions, they serve separate roles in society, but they seem to think that a lot of these kinds of things that our society creates are actually superfluous, that when we have a youth council we don't have any need for funding for non-governmental organizations. And I say exactly the opposite. That is where actually the most engaged, where most of our engaged politicians come from historically. So in keeping with that, I think we have a lot of room to dive into the mindset. How does it work? We are struggling under a right-wing government right now, which is more interested in infighting than actually working on the daily politics of running the country, as it seems at the moment. And that presents a challenge because we now have the security that the government got their mandate from the parliament, so things are proceeding as usual. But it still creates an atmosphere of uncertainty and insecurity, and we really feel vulnerable at this point. Most of our money that goes into the teaching materials, into funding arts and culture, has to be negotiated every year. And there is a tiny amount of that can be thought of as a fixed funding. And for a lot of things to happen, for a society to actually thrive, we would need that sum to be a lot larger, so we can actually hire people to do the work that needs to be done in education and culture and arts. Thank you.
Just to follow up on what you're saying about NGOs and the role of organizations, we are, and this is, I post this to Aili, because we are all a part of this growing institutional network. But what about organizations and role of the NGOs?
Well, I think it's really important to look back to the roots of the many Sami institutions. Where did they come from? And I'd like to follow up on Nina. Also, the Samis, we are a take charge people. We do it ourselves because if we don't, nobody does it for us. And through the Sami organizations, especially my own, Norwegian Sami Association, NSR, many of the important cultural institutions of Sami today has grown up, like Riddu, which came from young rebels in Olmaivaggi. One of them sat in the back, he snuck out, Henrik Olsen. I would like to acknowledge his and many others' work to building this fantastic indigenous cultural exchange arena. Marco Miano is sitting here in the public. They also came from young rebels, and they are still young. And I'm very proud that the Sami grassroots organizations have been able to promote our cultural life to that extent. And we cannot stop feeding those organizations. We need them because cultural entrepreneurship happens within them. So we, of course, institutions are important, but do not forget about the life outside of the institutions. Keep the organizations alive.
So, for not being too Nordic here, we also have our North American guests here, and I mean your context is even more complex than ours. You have a federal in Canada, a federal, a provincial, and a territorial level. You have a federal and a state level in Alaska. So, and you have indigenous First Nations government and native bands. So how do you cope with these structures? In addition to govern. Maybe you first, Stephen?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, as you say, I mean, in Canada, we have a federal government, it's a federation made up of 10 provinces, 3 territories. So we have a federal government with certain jurisdictions. We have provincial and territorial governments with other jurisdictions. Then we have self-defined indigenous communities with a certain level of self-governance. I think what's interesting, though, when we're talking about policy and specifically around cultural policy, though, to not wade into those particular politics, because that's what's kept us back. You know, that whole divide and conquer, or you have to talk to these people over here. Education is a provincial responsibility in Canada, but if you're on an indigenous community, it's a federal responsibility. So there's a huge disconnect there, and the federal government pays a lot less for indigenous education. These are all things that are well known in Canada. There's huge court cases going on. There's huge movement. There's been a mobilization of indigenous people in Canada. What I think we have to do, though, is move towards and always base how we're approaching various levels of government from a position of sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, self-determination. That we have to talk about reparation. The government has acknowledged its role in violence against Indigenous people, in oppressing Indigenous people, and has attempted to move beyond that. So now we have to assert our rights, Indigenous inherent rights, treaty rights. We have treaties in Canada, and we also have constitutional rights because the Indigenous are named in the Constitution. So as we move forward in cultural policy, we assert those rights. We proclaim our space in places like the Canada Council for the Arts, and we say that if we are on a self-determining trajectory, then we have to go back to our own sense of ourselves and demand that the part of the resources, because the land was taken, and what has become the economy of Canada is on Indigenous land, that we know, so that we can demand that we are treated as the first peoples of that land, and that the reparations must be made. Part of that reparation, I mean, there are those Indigenous people who say we have to have all the land back. That's probably not going to happen. But it can happen in various ways, and we've taken the position that the money that the Canada Council has from the federal government that's to go to arts and culture, part of that must be directed solely to Indigenous peoples based on our own terms, and then we evade and we don't wade into the politics, because then we decide. It's the Indigenous people who decide where that money goes.
And then Mara, and while Mara is talking, I would like the other of you to think, is this a line of arguments that could work here in Sápmi? Mara, please.
Well, I think Alaska is unique in terms of the relationship with the indigenous communities and the land and the rights to self-governance and self-determination, because Alaska tribes, and there are 220 of them, which constitute half of the number of indigenous tribes in the whole of the United States, have lost the right to govern the lands that they've occupied for 10,000 years. And so that loss of land governance has had profound impacts. And as wonderful as it would be, and I think people are asserting self-determination and self-governance as concepts and as values, I think people butt up against that constantly. And that there's a legal reality out there that needs to transform in the name of justice. And so I think that there are efforts to do that. The one bright spot, I think, in the way that indigenous land claims were settled in Alaska is that there were native corporations formed. And so economic self-determination, I think, happens to a great degree, which is vital because unlike the Nordic countries represented here, there is very little, and will be in the future even less, funding for arts and culture throughout the United States and in our own state. So it's very much incumbent upon people to help themselves in terms of coming up with the financial resources necessary to sustain culture and art. And so the native corporations that were created are not governmental organizations. They are corporations just like any other corporate entity. And so I think it's important to also question whether that's appropriate, because I think governments have obligations to preserve and promote and protect cultures. But in our case, the governments have completely abdicated that responsibility, and it is now resting with the native corporations to continue to sustain. But I think that there's also hope in that, and I think that people are persevering through that, and people are using whatever resources we can use, and that's what takes me back to this notion of we have to be creative in order to see our ways around the obstacles that exist to protecting cultures and ways of life and ways of knowing into the future.
Thank you. We do have, yes, we do have public funding for culture in the Nordic countries, but when you have reluctant states, Nina and Neta, is there something to gain to look at the European Union? We heard about EU structural funds. What's their role with regard to Sami culture?
Well, they have a big role, and I think, at least compared with Sweden, Sami questions are much better heard in the EU than in my own country or even my own region sometimes. Yeah, we have a country, Sweden, that is where the ground is funding culture, and there are money predestinated for Sami culture. As I said at the beginning, not as much at all as in Norway, and we are struggling with that. We have a Minister of Culture that's saying so good words about indigenous people and minorities, but there's not coming more money. And you have different programs in the EU, like the Interreg or the Northern Periphery money and so on. quite a lot money for another for the north, and also designated Interreg money for Sápmi. The problem there is that they have to be a national co-funding, like 35-50%. So at first it's quite hard to make the applications, and then if you don't have a state that can come up with the money, you don't see the money. So in one way, if you get anything, you get quite a lot, but if you don't, you get nothing. So you have to recognize this. And maybe now, because the Arctics are, it's so much in fashion in every domain, with the conferences, papers, and well, there is work going on right now about making an Arctic policy. I hope really that those matters will be one of the issues, but still I'm afraid that it will talk about the trains, about the ships, about the coal, the forest, the oil, the natural resources, and not about the people and culture. But we'll see. I'm optimistic as a person.
Aili has asked for the floor, and if there are questions and comments, please raise your hand.
Yeah, I would like to comment on
sorry,
just a
sorry.
quick comment on the
Yeah.
EU part. That I actually work in an Interreg-funded project. I work for a project called Sami Kielagaltu, which is doing language work in 5 Sami languages. And I'm the only one working with Inari Sami language, and part of my daily job is to do basic research into Inari Sami language, to advise people on the use of Inari Sami language, and promote the use of Inari Sami language in whatever way I find possible and feasible. And this is a EU Interreg-funded project, which means that the people who run it have to have very good liquidity, as Nina said, and it has been very hard. And the reporting system, while the project is ongoing, it's prohibitive. If you do not have that kind of infrastructure in your own organization, and a lot of people working in the cultural field do not have. People working on organizing festivals, for instance, do not have that kind of infrastructure. The Finnish Sami parliament barely has that infrastructure. It's a huge, heavy load to do. So, there's a possibility, but there's also I don't know, what can we use it for? I don't know.
Yeah, first Aili and then Sion.
We want you to fight for the mic.
Sure, cooperation demands capacity.
Yes, first Aili, then Nina, and then Marianne.
Okay. First me,
Yes.
she said.
Yeah, first you, first Aili. Yep.
Cooperation demands capacity in institutions, of course, and it's really sad that our language cooperation, where NETA works, has to be funded by EU. The Nordic states are not willing to fund it themselves. They should be ashamed of themselves. But if I was the Nordic states, we heard about mineral extraction and land rights issues all over the Arctic. If I were one of the Nordic states, I think it would be smart to put a lot of resources into indigenous languages and culture. Because if they did that, we would be so busy celebrating our cultures and taking back our languages that we probably wouldn't be noticing that they were still stealing our lands. So I'm really dumbfounded. Why don't they do that? Okay, that would be a smart strategy.
Yeah. Nina.
That's it. Nina, but Nina is not. I know Marianne is soon leaving, so she will have the floor first.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's important questions about the EU funding, and we have to build the knowledge and the capacity to participate and get our fair share of this money. And I think it is like this, that if we cooperate in the Arctic area, we will be stronger, and we will have a stronger voice to the Norwegian government and to the Finnish government and the Canadian government. And that's why when we go to EU and they look at us, then our own government also look at us. And I think also the acknowledgement and the truth and reconciliation processing in the many of the Arctic countries will make us able to have our own voices and tell our own stories.
So then we can say that
And
through
then it's Nina.
networking micro societies, we make a micro society, we make a macro. Nina.
Thank you. I just wanted to add when I forgot to say that I think that, well, it's good with all the money you can search and apply for the projects, but we are so living, I don't even know if it's a word, but a projectified world. Well, yeah, projects. What we need basic money from the municipalities, from the region where I'm responsible, and from the state. So then we can have when we want to do projects, search for that. But the big question is the basic fundings.